I spend a lot of my time thinking about multiple choice tests, and I know, very exciting. And besides the content and the skills required to answer questions, I think about, what is it about the structure of a multiple choice test, and in particular the SAT and ACT, that makes it hard. Where does the structure of the test, the fact that it's a multiple choice test with its particular features, where does that add in the difficulty? And I think I've realized something that if you understand and then take action to correct on your own tests, can help you avoid mistakes and just be more accurate in picking your answers. So this is going to be easier for you to do than for me, because I've been out of school for a very long time. But, take a minute and think about when you see multiple choice tests in school. Maybe it's in history class, or maybe it's in bio, or maybe it's in, some AP class. Think about your multiple choice test and think about how typically we answer those questions. So if it's a history test, let's say, and there's a question, when did the War of 1812 start? We go to those choices, and usually the choices are pretty simple. They're not very wordy often. They're a name or a phrase or a date or something. And we sort of look at the four choices, and we're looking for something to jump out at us. We're looking for one of those choices to be recognizable. And that's because typically multiple choice tests, especially at sort of the high school level, are tests of recognition. In other words, given a question, do you recognize the name, date, place, fact, whatever that answers that question? You actually don't have to generate the answer yourself. You have to merely recognize or remember what the answer is to that question. And the answer is in front of your face, right? It's one of the 4 or 5 choices. And so doing well on a multiple choice tests becomes about speed of recognition. We're relying on basically the unconscious mind to scan the choices and see which one fits with what the question's asking from what you remember reading or hearing or whatever. What we're looking for then is that aha, right? That moment where we see the choice that clicks in and yeah, that's it. I remember that fits, boom, 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 done. And once we find it, the other choices don't really matter as much. So now we approach SAT reading very often with that same frame of mind, with the same approach, same mindset that we take to a history test or a biology test, where it becomes about which of the 4 choices do I recognize as the correct answer, not based on what I learned in class, but from what I've read in the passage, whatever I've read from the passage and understood. And so I'm looking for the choice that jumps out to me as either what I expected to be the answer, or what I remembered reading, or a word or a phrase or an idea I remembered. I'm looking to recognize an answer. And that is the problem, especially on the medium and, of course, the hard questions. So, okay, I know I read something about volcanoes, and hey, look, choice A mentions volcanoes, and boom, there it is. That's my choice. But this is often where these traps are coming from. They're preying on that first instinct, that first sort of gut feel of recognition to say, yeah, I remember reading this. I recognize this. This seems like what the answer should be. That is sort of a problem in itself, because what you'll find very often on the harder questions is that first burst of recognition. If you keep reading the choice, if you look at the rest of the choice, you'll see often towards the end, in SAT reading in particular, there's like a word or phrase towards the end of the choice that actually doesn't work. But a lot of times it's hard to move off of that choice, because that first instinct, that first impression we have of that choice is, I remember this is recognizable to me, this is the answer. So the first mistake is stopping there. So what you need to do is, when you see a choice that looks promising, that looks good, you don't want to ignore that, because hey, on easier questions it's right. Just pause, right? Before you circle it and move on, just wait and say, okay, first glance this looks good, but first let me check 2 things. One, is the rest of the choice good? Like, does every part of that choice fit? Are there any flaws? Because in reading, in writing, occasionally in math, one error in the choice, one mistake, even if the rest of it is good, like here, one mistake dooms the whole choice. So before you sort of leap into that and say, yes, here it is, I'm done, boom, move on, I recognize it's the answer, just pause and say, okay, wait a minute, let me just check the rest and verify. A lot of times, yes, it'll be good. Other times, no. You will realize, there's a flaw, there's a mistake. And at that point, you got to keep going and find another answer. The second thing you need to do, even if you're pretty well convinced that A is the answer at this point, so let's say A looks good, every part of that choice is good, check all four. Right? Now, this is not something we typically do in history or biology tests, sometimes maybe, but we're trying to recognize an answer, we find it, we move. On the SAT, you really want to be as much as you can. I know time is an issue, especially on the ACT as well, but you want to be as thorough as you can in reading, in writing in English, ACT science, even occasionally on some math problems to say, okay, A looks good, but let me check B, C, and D. Let me make sure that, maybe I look at D and I realize, oh, wait a minute, D is actually looking pretty good too. And so now I got to make a decision between A and D, and maybe I'll realize, oh, wait a minute, I misread something in A. A's wrong, and it's D. That's a way to avoid a mistake. But you want to check all four choices because hopefully what happens is you check B, C, and D, and that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And now you're even more confident in your answer. And as a final point on the other end of things, be very careful taking this too much to heart, because a lot of times I see when students start this process, they'll look at choice A for a question. They say, okay, no, A is not right. And then they'll look at B and they'll say, no, B is not right. And then they'll look at C and say, oh, C is not right. And so they're left with D. And a lot of times they'll just say, yep, it's D. I'm done. But again, hold on. Very, very likely, yes, right? If you eliminated A, B, and C, very, very likely it's D. But just again, pause for a minute. Check D. Is D good? Does D fit? Does it answer the question? Is there evidence for it? And so on and so forth. If yes, you're golden. Move on. A lot of times, though, you'll see, you know what? D doesn't look great either. And it feels weird to cross out all four choices, but this is a good thing. What it means is basically start over. But start over knowing that in my first pass, nothing jumped out to me as being correct. Nothing seemed right. And so I might have to lower my standards a little bit. I might have to reread these choices, give them another look. Keeping in mind at this point that, all four of them failed the first time. But again, it's all about, tying it all together. Just speed is important, but accuracy is important. Understanding that this test is very different from your high school tests, very important. Taking the time to evaluate choices and think them through rather than just going by gut, because gut will work for 60% of the questions, but it's that other 40% that we really care about. Maybe that's a little low, but maybe 70-30, 80-20, whatever the percentage is. Gut is important, but thinking is even more important.